Tonight, we have a very special presentation. A great friend of mine, Glenn Thomas, is a phenomenal supporter of mechanical music in that he not only hosts a lot of wonderful events, but he also is on Mechanical Music Radio with his own show. And he has an incredible collection. I have to say, I think he has probably my all-time favorite organ facade in his collection. Uh, which you'll see because I carved it. So nonetheless, without further ado, Glenn will tell you more about what he does in mechanical music. And I would like to ask everyone, please, although this is a live presentation, Glenn has asked to hold all of the questions until the end. After the presentation will be a Q&A. Once again, I thank you. And here's Glenn Thomas.
Hey, Bob, thanks a lot for such a great introduction, and hello to everybody. I'd like to start just telling you a little bit about who I am. Several of you know me, probably most of you don't. I've been in mechanical music in one form or another probably for, well, since I was about 5 years old or so. That's probably the easiest way to say it. I grew up in Los Angeles and spent my entire young years in mainly in Southern California, heavily influenced by the mechanical music collections at Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm. Shortly after Disneyland opened, I was a teenager and I spent as much time there as I could, as long as somebody was able to drive me down. They had the Rainey collection and quite a few other instruments. We had a neighbor just about half a block away that had a player piano, and so I was influenced by the player piano of the neighbor. That got me into player pianos. I also grew up just a short ride away, either car ride or bicycle ride, from Griffith Park. Griffith Park had a Spillman carousel and also a Wurlitzer 165 band organ that from the time probably that even in my preteens, I saw that band organ and just couldn't get enough of it. My only problem was how was I going to get there? And that led to quite a relationship over the years while I was in California with the Davis family, who owned both Griffith and Lincoln Park. I also met several friends who would become mechanical music friends there, including Don Rand and of course the Ross Davis family, who were the proprietors of those parks. I was also influenced by Hathaway and Bowers, who got their start in Southern California in those early years. Other collectors that I knew from my teenage years and on, I mentioned Don Rand, other people such as Otto Carlson, Terry Hathaway, Jerry Cohen, quite a few others. Right from day one, I was probably destined to be sort of a Wurlitzer band organ specialist, an automatic player piano, Wurlitzer automatic player piano specialist, which became my primary interest in collecting. Excuse me, having moved a few times in California, it was a little hard to collect the instruments. And of course, being relatively young at that stage, it was further difficult. But over the years, I've accumulated about 30 instruments now. You're going to hear probably a little less than half of them, starting with some of the smaller, less iconic instruments, going all the way up to the larger ones at the end. For the most part, we'll be doing one tune on each of them, each of the ones I'm going to play for you, except some of the more obnoxious ones at the end. We'll play a couple of tracks on them. As Bob said, this is live in that I will be announcing and telling you a little bit about each of the instruments. In between the instruments, the actual playing of the instruments are recorded on videos, which seems to be the best way of doing this. So that's how we're going to proceed. As Bob mentioned, if you just make notes of any questions you might have, we'll do those at the end. Other things, mechanical music that I'm involved in, showing on the screen behind me, heavily involved in MIDI, working with Matt Jarrow. We've been doing just a ton of things on MIDI, accumulating not only Seeburg H, Weber Maisto, Wurlitzer automatic player piano, Cremona Emeralds, and so on. We believe that MIDI is sort of the present and future with mechanical music. We also think it's a very strong way to preserve music that otherwise would just crumble on old music rolls. And so we're heavily involved in MIDI, and of the 30 instruments that I mentioned, there's about a dozen of them that have MIDI included in them at no degradation whatsoever to the instrument. It's they're all reversible should we want to. I'm involved with all the mechanical music organizations: AMICA, MBSI, COAA, National Carousel Association. And one of my more active involvements is, Bob mentioned it briefly, Mechanical Music Radio. I have a show on Mechanical Music Radio Monday through Friday. It's in the Eastern time zone in the States. It's at 7 p.m. In the West Coast time zone in the States, it would be 3 hours earlier at 4 p.m. I'm on for 2 hours. I will leave it to you to listen and figure out how much of it is live and how much of it is recorded. But if you haven't listened to Mechanical Music Radio, you certainly should be. The internet address is shown right there on the screen. You can listen to it on a computer, on your smartphone. You can listen to it on Amazon Alexa, on Google Home devices, any of these kinds of things. Mechanical Music Radio is there. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's an incredible radio station of nothing but mechanical music. And if you like what you hear on what I'm going to play for you over the next hour or so, many, if not most of the instruments are on Mechanical Music Radio, as are so many other things. So as I say, I want to be sure that you're aware of Mechanical Music Radio and involved in it. And of course, if you're not a part of the mechanical music organizations that I mentioned that I'm a part of, and so many of us are earlier, then you certainly should be at least picking and choosing. Excuse me. These instruments have had a lot of work on them done by a lot of people. I'm very much indebted to a lot of the restorers. I do not consider myself a restorer. I consider myself a tinkerer, meaning I can do a lot of things and keep them running, but I rely on professional restorers to do that. People like Joe Hilferty, Paul Manganero, Dave Ramey, Jerry Biasella, Tim Westman, Art Reblitz, just to name some critically important people who have had many, if not most of the names I just mentioned have been involved in the work on these instruments, which is one of the reasons why they sound the way they do. I also believe in working with the younger generation and encouraging mechanical music to every possible way that I can, because that obviously is our future. I work with several young arrangers. You'll hear some music recently arranged by arrangers. I'm going to be playing less of the old original Wurlitzer or other music and more of stuff that's been recently arranged, just so you can hear what some of these wonderful young arrangers do. People like Andy Park, Mikey Mills. I also work with Tom Meyer in Europe, Art Reblitz, and until he passed away, Rich Olson. They've all been heavily involved in working on these arrangements for some of the new music that we do. We believe it's very important. Matt Jarrow and I believe it's very important to produce newly arranged music in all these categories that we're involved in, categories that I mentioned before. I'm particularly involved in Wurlitzer 165 music, Wurlitzer automatic player piano music, and now with Matt Jarrow, Seeburg H music, and a few other things, because we think MIDI is very, very important, as long as we don't compromise the original role-playing mechanisms. Okay, so that's a little bit of a background. I think sort of sets the stage. For the most part, now we're just going to be playing the instruments. And as I play the instruments, the videos, many of the videos, you will see the instruments being shown not only with the cabinetry or the doors closed, but with the doors open. I think it's important for people to see and hear instruments with the doors closed as they were set up in restaurants, in bars and whatnot, and how the manufacturers intended them to be. But also, as enthusiasts, I also think it's important to look behind them, see what and hear what they sound like with the doors open. And so you'll see me switching back and forth on a few of these instruments where there's something to see with the doors open or closed, just so you have a little difference. So we're going to start now with not necessarily the smallest, but I wanted to play Ramey Banjo Orchestra for you first, because this shows what can be done and what some really competent people are doing in building some new instruments and also being able to arrange music for them. The Ramey Banjo Orchestra is built by the Dave Ramey family, started by Dave's father, I think something like 25, 30 years or so ago. It was patterned after an original instrument, which is mostly extinct now, that was originally made 100 years ago. And the Ramey family decided that they could do that, only do it better. And they've just succeeded magnificently, not only with the cabinetry, but the interior. The arrangements, because there's no original music for this stuff going back 100 years, the arrangements have all been done by virtuoso arranger Art Reblitz. And if you've never heard an opportunity to listen to an arrangement by Art Reblitz, you'll have that opportunity right now. So here's the Ramey Banjo Orchestra playing Swanee. That was the Ramey Banjo Orchestra playing Swanee. The next instrument is a Nelson Wiggen small-sized style 8. Most people are familiar with J.P. Seeburg instruments. Seeburg probably built more instruments than anybody else during the teens, 20s. And most people are familiar with the small cabinet style known as the Seeburg L, sometimes referred to as the Seeburg Junior. Seeburg also built a KT Special, which had full instrument and ornamentation. They built all kinds of different pianos, but as good as Seeburg instruments and as popular as they were, a couple of gentlemen, Mr. Nelson and Mr. Wiggen, left the Seeburg company around 1920 and formed their own company, named it after them, called it the Nelson Wiggen Piano Company. And their motto was a better automatic. And most people would agree that they succeeded. What they were doing were copying Seeburg in terms of the style and the instrumentation of the pianos, but they found a better way to use cabinetry, to have a finer sound, get rid of some of the annoying things that Seeburg had, such as grinding gears during the rewind to play, any number of things. And the style 8 here, Nelson Wiggen, is equivalent to a Seeburg L, as I said, Seeburg Jr., but Nelson Wiggen found a way to put 24 xylophone bars and 24 bell bars in there. You can't tell there's 24 because they're back to back. You can see 12 bells and 12 xylophones, but behind them, there's another set. And so what Nelson Wiggen did was, even though there's 2 additional instruments and the A roll only has the capability of playing 1, they put a mixing mechanism in here, which alternates the xylophones and the bells. Definitely a better automatic. Here's the Nelson Wiggen Style 8, playing from a late Clark roll, Egyptian Ella. Notice the switching of the bells and the xylophones. That is the Nelson Wiggen Style 8 playing Egyptian Ella, a better automatic. And I think most people would agree listening to that, comparing it with a Seeburg Jr. or Seeburg Style L. Well, the next instrument does not have a politically correct facade, but we've not changed out the facade because this is exactly the way it was built. When you look at a catalog picture of this instrument from about 1918, when these were built, at least the very few that remain, it looked exactly like that. This is a Philips Pianella jazz band. To the best of my knowledge, there's only 2 in the States that exist, the one I have and one other one. There's a couple in Europe. The Philips company in Germany was probably they probably built as many instruments as Wurlitzer, Seeburg, and Nelson Wiggen combined. They made a ton of instruments, primarily for the European market, but also sold all over the world. They were the largest maker of mechanical music in Europe. It was mind-boggling, all the different cabinets, styles, instrumentation, the different roles they did. Well, one of the things that they did in an effort to be very competitive, as well as create something that was quite unusual, was build something that had a classical jazz orientation, which was the way this was sold. And you can see from the facade pictures that that was its intent. There were a few different instrumentation configurations of this. The arrangements were made by different European arrangers. And because the music is so rare, it was pretty hard to get any identification for certainty as to who did the arranging. This instrument has two ranks of pipes. It has sax reed pipes, it has violins. Additionally, it has bells, a bass drum, a woodblock, a triangle, and cymbal. And the arrangements are basically all European jazz classical arrangements. Fortunately, even though the music was crumbling, there are quite a few recuts that were available. And I was interested in this not only because the music is so unusual, so fantastic, and so rare, but the entire restoration of this piano was done by Art Reblitz. Art is one of our absolute finest restorers, and he specializes in roll changers, among other things. This instrument has a roll changer in. It plays 5 3-tune rolls, but each of the tunes on the 3-tune rolls run about 4 or 5 minutes because they're generally classical. The rolls are all written in German, and so it's somewhat difficult for me to interpret what some of these are. I thought it was good to just pick out probably an interesting jazz classical tune that most likely none of us know much about. It is, the name of the tune is Apollo's Waltzer Opus 218 by Lubitsky. I think a classical jazz arrangement of that particular style is probably a good word for it, at least in playing the various arrangements that I have. They're all extremely musical. Not too many tunes are recognizable just by the nature of these. One little piece of trivia that I should have mentioned before I start, if you're familiar with the way European instruments, especially the older, larger ones, play, the music rolls feed from bottom up. If you've ever watched a large European orchestrion, this one, the rolls feed more traditionally from top to bottom because Philips wanted to throw everybody a curve and create something that was uniquely original. And they patterned that particular style on this instrument after what they saw some of the manufacturers in the States doing, even though the Pian orchestras, also named under the Pianella brand, still always fed from bottom to top. A little piece of trivia. Also, the expression that you heard during the music roll, that expression is built into the roll, and not that the sound was going up or down for any reasons other than what was built into the roll. All right, now back to American pianos and music, and staying with sort of mid-sized orchestrions. This is the Seeburg G. Many people who have seen a lot of mechanical music instruments are somewhat familiar with the Seeburg G. This was the original large Seeburg orchestrion. They started building these in the mid-teens, built them all the way up through 1929, although in the 20s, the full-size cabinetry of pianos like this went out of style in favor of keyboardless instruments that had a much smaller footprint, that were more affordable, had more instrumentation in a smaller space. But this is a traditional Seeburg G. Seeburg built a ton of these. Fortunately, there's still something like 100 of them left, which is remarkable but when you consider there were about 800 built, it's not too good. It played the standard G roll, which was readily available, featured a rank of violins, a rank of flutes, and percussion from bass drum, snare drum, timpani beater, and such. And the tune we have for you is a foxtrot from the mid-1920s off an original automatic roll, She's Still My Baby. That was the Seeburg G, built by the J.P. Seeburg Company in the very early 20s, playing She's Still My Baby. Well, sticking with the mid-size orchestrions, my story a little bit ago about Nelson Wiggen pianos, that was that small piano I played that had both the bells and the xylophone side by side. Well, Nelson Wiggen, when they saw and heard what Seeburg had been doing so successfully on that last instrument, the Seeburg G, and also the one that sort of succeeded that, which was the Seeburg KT Special, Nelson Wiggen said, we need to come out with a model that's just like that, but we can do it better. Where Seeburg used oak, Nelson Wiggen almost exclusively used mahogany and walnut. You almost never saw a Nelson Wiggen piano built out of oak, yet most, but not all, Seeburg pianos were oak. That was considered a strong, desirable plus. Also, Seeburg pianos, for the most part, use repeating xylophones. I shouldn't say for the most part. In the G roll version, such as the G and other similar instruments, such as the KT Special, they use repeating xylophones. Nelson Wiggen said, we can do it better by working with the Clark Music Roll Company to create a music roll called a 4X, where the repetition was built into the roll, not the instrument. So the xylophones in a Nelson Wiggen style 6 or a Nelson Wiggen style 4X repeated, but only because the trill in the upper registers on the music roll was directly off the roll, and it created a very different sound. This Nelson Wiggen style 6, more rare than the one that's slightly smaller than that, which is the Nelson Wiggen 4X, which is the one that more people are familiar with. But think of this as the cabinet style that sort of one-upped Seeburg in building KT Specials and that style G orchestrion that you just saw. But of course, no pipes here, xylophones instead. The tune that we have is a great foxtrot from the mid-20s. There's a trick in pickin' a chick, chick, chicken. Nelson Wiggen style 6, playing there's a trick in picking a chicken. A couple things I should have mentioned too, but actually probably better that I do it now. I assume you could tell the difference between the way those xylophones were playing, where the trills were off of the music roll and not repeating xylophones, which can sound like woodpeckers that some of the manufacturers use, like Seeburg. Very noticeable and very different. Also, how about that clear glass? Nelson Wiggen pianos mostly had clear glass. There are some with stained glass. Do you know why Nelson Wiggen used clear glass? Because their promotional campaign was, we build a better automatic and we want people to see it. We want people to see the mechanism, see all the improved workmanship. Consequently, clear glass. There was one other thing they did too I didn't mention. They used a banjo attachment in there instead of a mandolin bar, a slightly different sound. When the mandolin register hole came over, created a similar effect, but because there were some little rinky-tink things that were sitting on the bar that dropped down, it created a different sound. Anyway, so much for that. Staying with the mid-sized orchestrion units, the Link company is better known for their Style 2E pianos, which are a small cabinet style piano that just played piano, mandolin, and xylophone. But they also made a little known mid-sized orchestrion with similar instrumentation to the two instruments that I just played for you. It was the Link Style A. The Link Style A was in competition with the same two manufacturers that you just saw and heard, so the instrumentation was pretty much the same. Link used two ranks of pipes instead of xylophones for the most part. Link's big selling feature, besides a gorgeous facade you can see with the glass, but Link's big selling feature was an endless music roll, 15 tunes that were in a complete loop. There was no play, rewind, and start over. Everything was, as you can see from the top, 1/3 of the upper front. There's just a jumble of paper in there. It just plays and plays and plays, shuts off after each tune, but it never rewinds. And so that was a big selling point, that the music just played and played and played. Plus, the operators never had to change rolls, primarily because it took about half an hour to change a roll. The other thing about Link pianos is, unlike the orchestrions that I just played for you, which for the most part use QRS masters in their Nickelodeon rolls, the Link pianos were arranged by their in-house arranger, not arrangers, a gentleman by the name of Ray Dio in Link's factory did most all the music arranging. And to my ear and most other people that I've talked to over the years, his arrangements were far superior to just QRS 88 note masters, which everybody else used in their Clark and automatic rolls. So as you listen to this instrument, note the endless music roll playing, listen to the quality and how different the arrangement is. The instrumentation pretty much the same of what you've heard. Also, above the cabinet, you'll see an extra front. When this piano was found, it had been through a couple of floods and the interior was pretty well wiped out. And so it took a lot of work to restore the interior. And there was an additional link I was able to find that was available for parts only. And so we combined a lot of the flooded out parts that needed to be replaced from this piano with the good non-flooded out parts from another link that was completely incomplete, but it had an additional facade, which was slightly different, gorgeous, that was just perfect. And so we put that additional facade on top of this one so one could enjoy both facades. So this is the Link Style A with an arrangement by Ray Dio on an endless roll. And let's see if I have the tune. The tune is There's Everything Nice About You. A Link Style A playing There's Everything Nice About You with an arrangement by Ray Dio, which to my ear is a lot better than the repetitive QRS masters that are heard on so many of the other instruments. And of course, that endless music roll, people just love to watch that. Try and change it though, and it becomes a little different story. All right, we're going to move from the Link Style A to the big brother of what you've been listening to so far. This is a Seeburg H. And this was the very largest orchestrion made by the J.P. Seeburg Company. They made about 700 of these. And fortunately, because they made so many, there's about 65 of them left, mostly in the States, but in different places. Of course, when you think of it, that's only about 10% of the instruments that are known that are still around. I say this is the big brother of the Seeburg G because it had everything that the G had, plus a little bit of additional percussion, such as a triangle and castanets. But the real selling point here was this is called a solo orchestrion, H solo orchestrion, because the upper octave and a half, way up in the upper 12 or 13 notes or so, were a solo section. And it actually played a counter melody in that solo section at certain times in the passage of the music to the main melody, which was being played in the middle octaves in the lower octaves of the piano. These were built by Seeburg from the late teens through the late 20s. And so all the music that's available on these is from that period. Seeburg also used, for the most part, QRS masters for their H rolls, but because they had to create far greater registration and also add the solo section, then the arrangers put a lot of creativity in. Now, on the Seeburg H, because it's such an unusual instrument and has so much capability, Matt Jarrow and I have gone through and we've gotten a hold of every known original H roll we get our hands on, scanned it, created a MIDI group of files of thousands and thousands of MIDI files of almost every known Seeburg H roll, not only to preserve the music, but to be able to play music on this great instrument. And so one thing a MIDI system also gives us the capability of doing, it allows us to transcribe tunes that were built for other instruments onto the Seeburg H. For instance, you may have heard the instrument or the name, the Weber Maisto. The Weber Maisto is a jazz-oriented instrument built primarily for the European market, although a lot of them made their way into the States. The pipes that were used and the voicing of the pipes was a very distinctive jazz orientation, and the arrangements were mostly all done by the great Gustav Bruder in a very distinct jazz style. And so when Matt and I heard all those Maisto arrangements, we said, the scale and the solo section, it's almost identical to what can be done on a Seeburg H. So Matt worked up a transcription program. And so we have the ability to not only play all the great H rolls, but also all the Weber Maisto tunes. We also did a similar transcription program to map Wurlitzer APP files to here. And just recently, we have Matt has done a similar transcription program for the Cremona M rolls, which has a lot of great music to play on here. But the tunes that I wanted to play on this for you, I didn't want to play a QRS master on an H piano, even though that's what most of the music is. But I wanted to play two tunes on here so you could just get a feel as to what we're doing. First, I'm going to play a Weber Maisto transcription. This is off of MIDI. The tune is a Gustav Bruder arrangement called Bim Bam Viella, but it's from a Weber Maisto roll played on a Seeburg H and shows the capability not only of what Gustav Bruder with Weber could do, but how interesting and amazing it is to transcribe something from one scale to another. Here is Bim Bam Viella. The great Gustav Bruder's arrangement, originally for Weber Maisto, transposed by Matt Jarrah's composition program onto a Seeburg H. Have another tune I want to play you on a Seeburg H. Here's the ability to do something on MIDI. I mentioned working with some very talented young arrangers. We work primarily with Andy Park and Mikey Mills on a lot of these instruments. I have an Andy Park arrangement via MIDI for a, I won't call it a contemporary tune, but some might think it's that. Here's the Battle of New Orleans, arranged by Andy Park for the Seeburg H. Well, that's what happens when you have too much music. Sometimes you just can't keep track of the titles. Of course, that was not Battle of New Orleans. It was the Battle of Bonnie and Clyde. So hopefully everybody sort of figured that one out. Anyway, that arrangement was by Andy Park on the MIDI system of a Seeburg H. Now, staying with mid-size orchestrions, I've shown you pretty much, I've shown you Seeburg, Nelson, Wiggen, Link, the large size Seeburg H. Now here's a Wurlitzer. I am absolutely in love with Wurlitzer instruments, as you'll continue to see here going forward. This is a Wurlitzer LX. This again was Wurlitzer's answer to compete with pretty much everything that you've been watching and listening to so far. A mid-size orchestrion. Wurlitzer built stacks of these in different model and different case styles. This LX version was the very last one they built. This replaced the style C and CX in 1921. Wurlitzer made 450 of these from 1921 until 1929, when the Depression pretty much killed everything. Fortunately, there's about 80 of these still remaining of the 450 that were built, at least that we know. And the model LX had a roll changer in, which played 6 5-tune rolls. And the intent was that somebody, before they put a nickel in, could turn a handle and choose the roll they want. That didn't work too well, and most root operators took that handle away, so people couldn't mess the roll changer up. At any rate, Wurlitzer used a combination of their in-house arrangers as well as some QRS masters. The Wurlitzer LX had a Wonderlight on top. The instrumentation inside was similar to what you heard: bass drum, snare drum. These late ones had a set of 14 bells, and the bells were single strike bells, but the bells operated the same way as Nelson Wiggen did. That is, the repetition on the bells, the trills were off the music roll, not that the bells were anything other than single strike. So you're going to hear a tune off the Wurlitzer roll changer. This is a Wurlitzer arrangement of a great late 20s foxtrot called Is It Possible? And notice the bell register going on and off. An arrangement done by Wurlitzer's in-house arrangers of a tune from the late 20s called Is It Possible? Taking full advantage of the bell register. Well, Wurlitzer built the style C and the style L, of which this is, but that was the largest orchestrion that they built inside, but they wanted something bigger and stronger than that. So in 1908, Farny Wurlitzer went to Germany and made a deal with the Philips company, who I told you earlier built all these orchestrions. And Philips built a Pianella line of orchestrions with all different cabinet styles, different instrument configurations. And Wurlitzer took one look at those and said, we have to have these. And so they made an arrangement. Philips would ship a stack of these. Hundreds of these came into the States. They were rebadged as Wurlitzer Pian Orchestras. Some of the larger later ones were concert pian orchestras. The earlier and just plain large ones were mandolin pian orchestras. But these were all built by Philips in Germany, sold as Wurlitzer, different cabinet style, roughly twice as big from the footprint as to what you just saw. All the musical arrangements were all done by Wurlitzer's in-house arrangers. And this particular instrument, this was found, as you see in this picture, at the RKO Studios in Culver City, California in the 1960s. Don ran through tracing down some rumors, found that this instrument, which was originally built for a movie theater and sold by an instrument dealer in downtown Los Angeles in about 1910, had been stored in the RKO Radio Pictures Theater in a storeroom for over 30 years. And Don, Terry Hathaway, and a few other people took one look at this thing and said, this is like impossible to restore and rebuild. but they got it out, and there were a bunch of parts there. And just moving it out of there, this all occurred in the 1960s or so, was quite something to behold. And it's just amazing that anybody could have brought this back. There wasn't a lot of original music with it either. This instrument featured a piano, mandolin, 30 wood violins, 19 wood violas, 30 cellos, 30 piccolos, a 30-bar set of repeating xylophones, a 13-bar set of orchestra bells, a snare drum, bass drum, cymbal, kettle drum with 2 beaters, triangle, tambourine, and castanets. And these were done in different cabinet styles. This particular instrument was restored to the way you see it now. It's hard to believe that those pictures that you saw coming out of RKO Studios in Culver City in the 60s could have been restored. Obviously, there was a lot of work done. Fortunately, all the pipes, everything about it inside was still available. A few things had to be replaced. This is just an incredible instrument for pop music and classical music. Anything like this, classical music, is something to behold. Most classical pieces are so long that it's really hard to find one. I'm going to play you the first tune I ever heard on a piano orchestra in the Otto Carlson collection, a tune called Happy. And when I heard that tune when I was a teenager, I said, oh boy, would I love to have an instrument like that. Well, here's the Mandolin Piano Orchestra, which is a size bigger than the one Otto Carlson had. And the tune is the first tune that sold me on it, called Happy. That's Happy on a Wurlitzer style 33A piano orchestra. And I'd be very remiss if I hadn't found just a short, terrific classical piece. These instruments show off classical music, especially known classical pieces, that finding a 2 to 3 minute one was a task. But here's the La Traviata Potpourri. The Wurlitzer Mandolin Piano Orchestra Style 33A, built by Philips in Germany, survived 35 years in the RKO studios in Los Angeles, built back to life primarily by Tim Westman, who did the restoration on that. Now we move to American band organs, and the Wurlitzer Style 166, as I call it. This was originally built by Bruder. A Bruder built it in Europe. We don't know exactly where or what it did or who brought it in, but it was found in a warehouse here in the States where it had been stored for something like 30 years, had been to the Wurlitzer factory. Wurlitzer put a duplex Wurlitzer roll mechanism in it, added some pipes, essentially Wurlitzerized it, but it had no facade, didn't have a lot of other stuff in it as well. Well, I had an opportunity to acquire this primarily because it had Wurlitzer brass pipes and some other things that would be a style Wurlitzer that I could make it play with all the registers of a style Wurlitzer 166. But I needed somebody to build a facade. And who but Bob Yorberg? Bob Yorberg, take a look at this facade. This, with the exception of the statues, which I'll tell you about in a minute, this facade over a lengthy period of time was designed and built by Bob Yorberg using a 165, Wurlitzer 165 facade as a model. But what Bob did on this is, I refer to it, he made it jump. This looks like a Wurlitzer 165 facade on steroids, and you wouldn't even know unless you compared the two. Bob did the carving, did all the work on that. All the gold leafing and the finishing was done by Pam Hesse of Hawk's Eye Studio in Arizona. And the illustrations that you see top, bottom, along the bottom of the facade and the very top, those were done by Marguerite Jr. from actual photographs that I gave her. And the color scheme, we all chose that it would be a compatible color scheme. The two statues that you see on the front, those are two original Wurlitzer 165 statues, the only two known. Those were discovered by Fred Dallinger. Those were stored in Texas in a warehouse. Fred, through a series of fortuitous events, found those. They needed a lot of restoration work. When you look at Wurlitzer 165 catalog pictures from original early organs, a few of the early catalog pictures have those two statues, but we know of no original ones except these. These were restored and the work was done, combination of Bob Yorberg, Pam Hesse, did the work on those, and so they would grace the front of the facade. Now, from a musical standpoint, we made this into a Wurlitzer 166 because it already had brass pipes. The Wurlitzer style 165 music roll has 5 additional registers that the larger style 166 had that are shown on this register board. The brass trumpets on top are on this, but not on Wurlitzer 165s. In the melody section, you see the Preston violin. That's an added rank of violins. Also, the uniphone bells is an additional set of repeating bells that are not on the style 165. We added those. And then on the bottom, the snare drum fortissimo register. These are all registers that appear on Wurlitzer style 165 music rolls, but there really are practically no instruments that play those until this. Joe Hilferty did the restoration. We did a MIDI system on this organ, and true to trying to emphasize working with young arrangers and doing tunes that other people want to hear. We produce Wurlitzer 165 new music rolls. We work with some people who are sort of tunesmiths who commission rolls, people like Matthew Caulfield, Andrew Lardieri, John Malone, and others. And we work with them to pick out some tunes. In this case, Andy Park did this arrangement just recently, and the tune is via MIDI called I Looked Back, played on a Wurlitzer 166. That was I Look Back, arranged by Andy Park, played on a Wurlitzer style 166, facade by Bob Yorberg, restoration by Joe Hilferty. I should have mentioned that light board there on the bottom, which we showed you a close-up earlier. The band organs and fairground organs that we do here all have these register boards. One can look at the list of registers and see the indicator light, so you know at all times what registers are playing just by watching these lights change. People love to watch the register lights change depending on the register. Plus, it adds so much more educational value when you know what registers you're listening to. All right, that's the Wurlitzer 166. Now, the finest and largest band organ on the coast, from an original sign from Ross Davis and Sons from 1924, when this organ was originally built. The finest and largest band organ. They did concerts every afternoon from 2 to 5, as this original sign shows. And this organ is the Wurlitzer 165 Lincoln Park, installed in 1924, played at Lincoln Park just east of Los Angeles for 50 some years. Lincoln Park burned down, but fortunately the organ was being repaired at the time and the organ was saved. Everything was lost, but there's a lot of original signage and different views of the facades. You can see it has lights. One of only 5 Wurlitzer 165s of the 11 that are known that have lights. The others were mostly built without lights, but it takes on a whole different view when you see different images of the facade under different lighting, with different images with the lights being on or off. There's some very interesting old signage with this organ that came along, including one of the original giraffes. These are all original signs from this Lincoln Park organ. Back in the day when the rides were 5 cents, you can see some of the original pictures. Even there's the original bill of sale for this organ when Wurlitzer sold it to Ross Davis, and all the original signage, including on the upper right of this picture, 3 hoofs from horses that were turned into charcoal when the Lincoln Park fire occurred. Also, this giraffe was one of the saved figures that was being restored at the time and worked on. I got a hold of it from Ross Davis's granddaughters not that many years ago. The restoration on this was done by Pam Hesse, who did the work on the restoration work on the facade. And so here's an original Spillman giraffe from this carousel, which was side by side with the Lincoln Park organ for all those years. Now, the catalog picture, that's what a catalog picture for the organ originally looked like. And the tune I have for you on this organ is the original, that is the tracker bar chart. The tune I have on here is an arrangement done by Mikey Mills, one of our wonderful young arrangers. And Mikey loves to do tunes from the 20s and 30s. Here is a roll we recently released. This is from a newly produced roll, all arranged by Mikey Mills. The tune is the 30s hit, Now Is the Time to Fall in Love. The original organ from Lincoln Park, California, just east of Los Angeles, built in 1924, played there for 50 years. Now very happy in this private collection. Now we finish up with a European organ. I had wanted a European organ for many years, and looking around at different options, opportunities to acquire something, I really was very specific in the size and the instrumentation, the registers that were available on it. Ultimately, that took me to Johnny Verbeeck, and I spent quite a bit of time with him working on specifications in creating one that was exactly what I wanted. One that would originally play on books as well as MIDI. So it has that capability. And of course, we wanted the register board, the lighted register board that you see right down there on the bottom. It's on a different style of register board, but nevertheless lights up the register. So we did this in two phases. One, the first was a 98 key portion, which was primarily good for lots of popular and classical music. And then we expanded it. But this was the original organ that came in that Johnny Verbeeck built. The nickname we gave it was the Glacier. The paintings were done from the illustrations were done from original photographs that we had. And the tune I'm going to play for you now is a very short classical rendition of the Barber of Seville. And just a few years after that came in, it wasn't enough. We needed to expand it. We needed to add a jazz orientation to it. And so we took it up to over 500 pipes, up to 23 registers and 125 keys. It's in two pieces, but it plays as one organ. Here is the great 30s Foxtrot, Putting on the Ritz, arranged by Albert Decap, with the entire both sides, all 500 pipes, 23 registers playing. And finally, here's what we call the Looney Tunes medley. See how many of these short snippets you remember. And that's all, folks. Questions, comments?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the tour, Glenn. And I do want to say that seeing them in real life is 1,000 times more impressive. So if anyone gets a chance to attend one of the meetings, I think you're going to love it beyond all get out. Glenn, thank you again. We open it for questions.
Glenn, this is Bob Stumer.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Well, actually, this is not a question, but a comment. Every project that you've tackled, whether it be for Amica or for COAA, hosting a Lady Liberty chapter meeting or editing the magazine, you've always done a magnificent job. And that's why I was expecting nothing less tonight. And I've really enjoyed it. It was absolutely terrific. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bob. Very, very much appreciated.
Glenn, I have one question for you, and I wanted to draw your attention to my background image, which is the carousel at Griffith Park.
Yes.
I moved from Los Angeles back to the East Coast about 7 months ago, but I'm thinking about the Santa Monica Pier carousel and that poor band organ that's sat there silent for the last 3 years, and this carousel. But my question for you is about the jazz band Pianella. I'm curious as to whether you have any music of Gottschalk.
I believe so. I don't have right in front of me the complete list, but I believe I do. Fortunately, I don't really acquire anything or keep anything unless there's a lot of music to go along with it. I have over 100 tunes for that instrument, and I believe the answer is yes. And if you want to email me at my email address shown on the screen and ask me that question, I'm glad to look and give you the answer.
That would be fabulous. It just seemed like the right instrument for that sound.
Yes.
So, thank you so much. This was a beautiful, beautiful presentation. I loved it.
Thank you.
Well, if I might make a comment here from outside our nation's capital, this just really blew my mind. And like I said, it was Mary Pat Cooney who told me about this gathering tonight. And I'm a drummer with many, many different bands on over 100 CDs. And I've been looking for a live band that's as steady as these guys. And the machines are amazing. The mathematically straight fractions and all kinds of great dynamics going on. I want to learn about the people who built, engineered, designed, and the musicians. I just wonder, how could anybody be so brilliant as to design such a machine and then do the scores? They'd have to know orchestra conducting and the range of every instrument. So I appreciate your opening my eyes to this amazing world.
Well, thank you for that. And especially when you consider that most of the architecture, music, and the heyday of this was well over 100 years ago, it's even more remarkable.
I should also mention that if you'd like to find out more, both attend the rallies and the events from each of the organizations, and you can go to the websites to find out when and where they are. And also there's some wonderful resource information on each of the websites for Carousel Organ Association of America, Music Box Society International, and the Automatic Musical Instrument Collectors Association. So I think you'll have a lot of fun